Greetings, I'm Ramiro Salazar, Director of the San Antonio Public Library. It's my pleasure to bring a warm welcome to all of you this evening. This year, we're very proud to be partnering with Luminaria to bring to you that experience. Now, it's going to look different this year. The pandemic has really impacted all of our local organizations, especially our art organizations. And so Luminaria has found a way to pivot and bring to you an experience that I think you will enjoy. So we are honored to participate by presenting members of the San Antonio community with new ways of experiencing art through the Luminaria Artist Foundation's Fall Series. So this approach is different, it's modified, it's more virtual. And so we're proud that the modified structure or approach will give us an opportunity to highlight incredible artists. And so for us, for the San Antonio Public Library, we will be featuring Octavio Quintanilla, who will present his incredible work in the form of visual poems. So again, we are very happy and proud to be presenting Octavio Quintanilla as part of our partnership with Luminaria. Enjoy the program. Thank you.
Welcome to the Luminaria Artist Foundation Fall Series in San Antonio, Texas. I'm Kathy Armstrong, Luminaria's Executive Director. The Luminaria Artist Foundation is a program that gives local artists in San Antonio, Texas, a chance to create new artwork. And this spring, 6 phenomenally talented artists from all fields, visual, performing, literary, and accommodation, were awarded those grants to create their work and to showcase it to the public. However, this spring, the world was also hit with the health pandemic of COVID-19, which has forever altered our world and is also altering the world of these 6 artists who wanted to showcase their artwork with the public. It is with great honor today that we are with one of our partners, San Antonio Public Library, who along with our funders, allow us to give the experimentation and creativity to showcase the artwork of these 6 grantees. Tonight, you will experience the work of Octavio Quintanilla. Thank you so much.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this very special event tonight. My name is Morgan Yoshimura, and I am the Coordinator of Services to Adults for the San Antonio Public Library. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing our moderator, Jim LaVilla-Havelin, and our guest speaker, Octavio Quintanilla. Tonight, our moderator will be Jim LaVilla-Havelin. Mr. LaVilla-Havelin is an arts educator, an administrator, and a critic. He has served as the director of the Young Artists Program at the Southwest School of Art and Craft for 17 years and has authored multiple books of poems. His work has been featured in various magazines and anthologies, including the Texas Poetry Calendar, Between Heaven and Texas, On Turtle's Back, and many others. Thank you, Jim, for participating in tonight's event and serving as our moderator. I also have the pleasure of introducing our featured guest speaker and artist, Octavio Quintanilla, a renowned author of fiction, a translator, a poet, a photographer, and a native of Harlingen, Texas, who served as Poet Laureate of San Antonio from 2018 to 2020. Mr. Quintanilla's works have been featured in various publications across the country, including the Texas Observer, Alaska Quarterly Review, Southwest American Literature, and many more. He holds a PhD from the University of North Texas and currently teaches literature and creative writing in the Our Lady of the Lake University Graduate Program, while also serving as editor for Texas Book in Review. It's an honor to host Mr. Octavio Quintanilla this evening, and we are excited to share his collection Frontextos in the form of postcards, which we have had available at all San Antonio Public Library locations as part of the Luminaria Artist Foundation's Fall Series, which is ongoing through tomorrow, October 30th. I would also like to encourage you to visit the online exhibition of Frontextos at guides.mysapl.org/Frontextos. On behalf of the San Antonio Public Library, It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jim LaVilla-Havelin and Octavio Quintanilla for tonight's event. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
My name is Jim LaVilla-Havelin, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this discussion with Octavio Quintanilla. I want to thank the library and Luminaria and the Artist Foundation and everyone involved in making this possible. And I don't want to talk much more because we really want to converse and show you some of Octavio's Frontextos. For those of you who don't know Octavio Quintanilla, he is a former San Antonio Poet Laureate. He is a teacher and poet and a voice to be reckoned with. And on January 1st, 2018, Octavio Quintanilla started a group of visual poems, a daily visual poem called the Frontextos. And they are what we're going to talk about because they provide a kind of interesting window into journal work, daily poetry, public poetry, voice, image, and word, and how they go together. So Octavio, I just did some tabulation, and from January 1st, 2018 to the present, you're at about 1,030 Frontextos, yes?
Yeah, that's right, more or less.
Running out of ideas?
Not yet. I think it's going to be a project that's going to keep going for a while. The more I do, the more I have something to feed off, you know. So I don't think I'll stop tomorrow, but who knows? I mean, maybe in a few months, all the ideas will be gone. And
but you know, I mean, there was actually a facetious and silly question because in some ways, and I want you to address this a little and maybe show some of the work. In some ways, the very dailiness of the process eliminates the question of running out of ideas. You are fed by its dailiness as much as by, it's not like sitting down anew each day without a clue.
That's right. I have a lot of work in process. So it's not like I have to create a Frontexto tonight. I already have about 30, 40 pieces of work done. And that's the luxury of time that I have right now to work on them. I work from home, so 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I spend sketching, and then I put it away, and then I'll come back to it maybe a few days later. And that's the way it goes, Jim. I have about 3 or 4 areas in my house where I have notebooks and paint and pens. So you're right. The process itself feeds me, and I don't have the pressure to create one Frontexto or a Frontexto per day as I used to at the beginning when I first started the project. When I first started the project, I was actually working on that Frontexto that day, because the idea was for me to post it on social media every day. And the more I did it, the more work I produced. And right now I'm at a point where I have work, for a month or so. Nonetheless, just because I have that work done doesn't mean that I don't keep creating. It's just part of my everydayness now.
Okay, so I want us to look at some work, but I want to at least address the fact that you had a wonderful first book of poems called If I Go Missing. And the thing that I love about all of your work, the thing that comes ringing true out of If I Go Missing, is the tactility, the physicality, the objects within those poems. And I wonder, how does the move to visual imagery change the work, both the work you're doing that isn't Frontextos, but also the fact of the object itself instead of the word for it on the page?
Well, now this is just another alternative to express myself, to express what I think is poetic, and not always having to rely on language is liberating, and that's why, as you will see. If you see the screen, those are some of the first Frontextos that I did, and they're all overall the page is full of text, of words.
Though some of the words, let's stick with Cuervo for a minute. Some of the words are obscured, are erased.
Right.
And you and I have talked about, and I don't think we need to go into it at this point, because it's a literary and visual concept that I think is a little effete, but erasure is a big deal these days in contemporary art. You approach it somewhat differently. Cuervo, cuero, uro, ro, the word disappears.
Right.
But the bird doesn't.
Right. And the cuervo, the first word is crow, and then I deleted the V, and it the word changed to cuero, which is hide, right? And then euro, I deleted two words, and it became euro, and that is. I was trying to figure out what that word would be, if it was a word at all, and I found out that it was an extinct cow that no longer exists. But there is a cow that's called the euro. And then you have the ro after deleting 4 words, and ro is the sound that I guess in Spanish, it's the sound that you make to put the lullaby, that the sound that you make to put a baby to sleep, ro, ro, ro.
Yeah.
So one word turned into 4 ideas,
Just by erasure.
Right.
We just had someone ask, what is a Frontexto and why, what are they? And so, and I think if you want to go to Donde Terminar Mi Memoria, 13, I think it is, we'll.
I think, oh yeah, that one?
This one.
Yeah.
I think that we can address the question of what is a Frontexto here and get at some other things. ¿Dónde termina mi memoria y dónde comienza el mar? Where does memory end and where does the sea begin?
Right.
Okay. So why Frontexto versus concrete poem or picture poem? What is the frontier? What is the edge we're looking at in your Frontextos? Okay.
Right. Well, as you can see, I think the poem evokes that idea of how limited we are sometimes with the language that defines us, that we know. And because of that, when I first started doing the Frontextos, I used to call them borradores. A borrador in Spanish is a draft. But then I wanted to do something what I don't know, I thought was original, and I blended two words, frontera and texto. So there, frontera is border, and texto is text. So I blended those two words, and it became this type of visual poem. And I think, I mean, you can look at it in so many different ways. Just the idea of borders and the idea of text and and language itself, how we in, language itself is a border, can be a border that I'm trying to cross by uh, not using as much as I used to, as you will see later in the new work.
And in fact, in many of the new pieces, what words there are appear solely on the borders of the
Right,
piece.
right.
However, you're also talking the political reality of border life and uh, border literature,
Yeah.
something that's very, very central to If I Go Missing
Right.
and much of your other writing. Um, if you are folks who see Octavio's Frontextos on Facebook on a regular basis, you will recognize the stack of houses as a trope that's in many of the works. I specifically responded to this one because it asks about this question of edges. Where does memory end and where does the seed begin? And that's a
Well, if you look at that Frontexto, I mean, where does memory begin? Where does it end? You know, where does the sea begin? Where does it end? Maybe it begins outside of that page. I always the page itself is defined by borders. You know, you can only do so much in a page, and I always see the page as a container that I can pour elements into. You know, and mess around with that to see what is produced. Sometimes very intentional, and sometimes with a sense of play.
Let's
And-
go back.
Mhm.
Let's go back to number 7, Los Torturados, because I do think there's an interesting question to be raised about the issue of how poems appear on pages. And here's Los Torturados con sus heridas nos hablan.
Mhm.
And in the piece I wrote about your work for Pilgrimage, I specifically addressed this piece about the malleability of language on the page, that you were freed from the kind of straightforward
Right.
work, but also about the fact that in the geometry of the piece, there are the pieces of a cross or the pieces of a swastika, the functional boards of material, all of which address what the topic is. Los
Right.
torturos con sus heridas nos hablan.
Right. Los torturados con sus heridas nos hablan. The tortured speak to us with their wounds. And maybe that, you know, this Frontexto becomes a metaphor with what most of us writers are working with, poets, you know. That's the boards are the language, and how do you organize them? You know, how do you put them together to make meaning? And
Or unmake.
or unmake meaning, yeah, deconstruct or construct. So I think you know, that's, In addition to what the words say, the images themselves become a metaphor for how some of us work with language, and if this is all the language that I have, then I'm automatically limited. But at the same time, there's a lot of possibilities of how to reconstruct whatever it is you want to construct with those boards. I mean, you can construct a house, you can construct a building, or you can construct a cross, like you said, a crucifix or a swastika, you know. So yeah, I think that's where it was going,
And if you were constructing a house, you might have one of those measuring pieces that fold out in pieces. You know those carpenter's tools that are measuring pieces that fold. Right. You might have one of those that that would easily be represented this way as well.
Right.
And
maybe to someone, all that material is going to be useless. Might be useless.
And the repetition. An interesting issue there too. I think what it says needs. You should pardon the expression, pounding in. Needs.
Yeah.
Well, which is what repetition is.
Right.
And yet repetition in poems on a straight page doesn't work this way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on. You are currently in a series in a voice within the voice called Los Días Oscuros.
Right.
The Dark Days. And this is your pandemic work, your work in response to life in quarantine, on screen, the life we're all living now.
Right.
Or trying to.
Well, yeah, this series is, I started it when San Antonio went into quarantine. And it just felt like a starting point, for me to start a new series within the larger project of Frontextos. And I called it The Dark Days, or Los Días Oscuros, simply because those days, at the beginning of the pandemic, quarantine, I mean, this is the first time many of us experienced that. And everything felt bleak for a while.
Well, in your color work, which has often been absolutely brilliant and gorgeous and powerful, got bleaker. The color palette reflected, there are studies of Van Gogh's work that show his color in different parts of his mental state. And yours is not so much that as it is the world's state. Here we have this stack of houses again.
Mm-hmm.
Cuando muera la luna vendrá a decirte.
I mean, the picture itself is very, attractive to the eye, pretty, but the text says, when I die, the moon will come and tell you. So there's that, that element of darkness, and that contrasts with the scene, I guess, the color,
which is a restatement of If I Go Missing. I mean, one of the wonderful things about all of this work is that the themes are themes you replay in various modes and places throughout. They're both personal and universal, and that's I find that to be very powerful. We've discussed this before, but do you feel a narrative in the work as a whole?
Yeah, I think now, at the beginning of this project of Los Frontextos, I was thinking about each one individually. You know, this is the Frontexto for today. You know, this is the Frontexto for tomorrow. But after 2 years and a half, you know, almost 3 years, uh, I can look back and look at this project, you know, with a sense that it's becoming, I don't know, it's becoming my life's work. You know, it's like this big book that I'm writing about my experience with the world, about my relationship with others, um, uh, about the relationship with the world, of the world with me. So I'm going inward and outward, interior, exterior, and it's becoming a narrative. It's becoming a big book of poetry, a novel. You know that. I mean, think about it. You said that in three. Up to now, I have 1,050 Frontextos I've done so far,
Right.
more or less. So what if I do this for the next 20 years? If I post or I share with my audience a Frontexto every day for the next 20 years or 10 years, you know, what is all that going to mean? At the end of the day, it might not mean anything. Um, and that's fine. That's fine with me. I'm not doing it for I don't know, for fame or glory or money or whatever. This is like I feel lucky for having found, in a sense, my a way into exploring myself, my humanity, and in turn, I mean, I do hope that others relate to it. You know, I mean, that's as artists, as writers, as poets. I think that's at the end of the day, that's what we want, to connect with others, for our work to connect.
So perhaps your songs of innocence and experience, to go back to William Blake, who used the visual
Right.
and the word. I don't want to get through this without referring, so that our audience makes a little note of this, to Kenneth Patchen, the
Yeah.
American picture poet and poet, who spent a lifetime in grave pain and mostly flat in bed, but making picture poems, drawings with words. There are many, many other examples of the word and picture brought together. And so I think, you know, one of the things I find really intriguing is how you fit into a tradition,
Right.
as well as expand it. You mentioned, and we have mentioned, that you post the work on social media, on your
Right.
Facebook page every day.
Right.
You were a San Antonio Poet Laureate. I want to ask you about the role of public poetry and the publicness of this conversation that is the Frontextos.
Well, something like this. I mean, if you're publishing it every day, which is really not, I guess, traditional publishing, where you send out stuff and to a journal and wait for 3-4 months before they get back to you, and then you realize they rejected you, or somebody liked your work and they publish it, and then you know, maybe I don't know, a couple of hundred readers see your work. Publishing every day to on social media. I mean, basically everybody, and anyone who interacts in social media has access to it. So there is that immediacy, and it's public in such a way that you're so vulnerable too. You know, it's a risk. I think you're taking risks. Like you become vulnerable to criticism, um, to whatever. But at the same time, it also, I think, it feeds me, when I create and I post, I'm not thinking of my audience. I'm thinking about the work that I've created.
But do you get comments back?
Yeah, sometimes I do. I think for me, it's really interesting that that's something that it's so intimate for me, something that I created, that it's very personal, because most of my work is it's either handwritten or, I do use, sometimes I do type a text, but a lot of the work is done with hand. It's done with my hands. So it's very intimate, and it's always amazing to me how often I do get comments from people I don't even know that they connected to some aspect of my work, sometimes to the words and sometimes to the images themselves, and sometimes to both. So to me, that's really interesting to find out how someone you've never met has connected, and then they take the time to let you know, hey, I felt this, or your Frontexto, made me feel this type of emotion, or your Frontexto, your words reminded me of someone.
So for a novice coming to them,
Mhm.
what would you say to them about how to read your Frontextos?
I think, I mean, you can approach it in different ways. You don't even have to read it. You just have to experience it. You just have to look at it,
Well, I was using read in the art museum mode too, of reading a picture.
Right, right.
So how do you?
Well, I mean, I think the easiest way for me, I mean, if you want to get kind of technical, I think you can think in terms of the relationships and the Frontexto, the relationships between text and text, between image and image, and between text and image. But I don't know, I'm thinking more, I think that's, you get to the point of, you begin to analyze. And for me, a Frontexto, I think is going to take time for you to take in everything that's there, you know? I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, I want to go back to number 11, the a veces quiero ser árbol, which we put in, and then we'll talk a little bit about the portraits because I love them. I love the work is very strong and always moves me. This is a veces quiero ser árbol. At times, I wish or want to be a tree. And I wrote you this afternoon and I said, there's something so heartbreakingly pure about the image that says what the words mean. Why, in fact, do you need the words? and it's hard for me as a word person to say that, but I wonder.
Well, if you notice, and you've seen some of my work, a lot of my work, recent work, doesn't have any text at all. It doesn't have any words. And I think this is one of those Frontextos where I really had a hard time deciding whether to add the words. And at the end, I did add them. I did write the phrase "a veces quiero ser árbol." I guess the three trees in the Frontexto, I guess they could evoke that, somebody or wanting to be a tree, but for some reason, I guess in my mind, I kind of wanted to guide. You know, you just asked me about how to read a Frontexto, and I think sometimes I do want to add some element where that serves as a guide to be able to read what's there.
Well, there's also in this, what isn't in the visual, in the image of the three trees is a veces. You know, I mean, one of the things that I think people lose when they look at your work, the relationship, one of the things I think people should be very aware of is the careful consideration of the text. The words are not thrown out. They're there with a deep purpose. And these trees you've become a trope as well in your work. I've seen them now across the years. And they're lovely.
You know, I'm fascinated by trees. I love trees. I used to climb trees all the time as a kid. And I think, you know, I'm working with memory here, you know. And I remember the trees I climbed, and why not? Sometimes I wanted to be a tree.
Actually, as a boy, I'd climb trees, reach into nests birds would leave unattended. This from an issue of Arcadia that included visual images, but were not yours. They were Vincent Valdez portraits sprinkled through the whole issue. But this was 2 years before, or a year and a half before you started the Frontextos. I wonder if that visual resonance of those images next to your work had any kind of subterranean push.
I don't know if those were specifically the ones that kind of got me to start doing my visual work, but I've always been interested in combining modes of expression. You know, I found a notebook from like 2004, 2005, and I have some images, some sketches, and I have text. You know, and the last time I went to the valley, I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. I found a pile of my notebooks, and there it was, and I remember just loving to see that combination of words and text, of sketches, of drawings that seemed incomplete, of poems that seemed just notes, you know, without realizing that, you know, that sometimes that's what it seems, you know, and a lot of times people don't see the intention behind it. So I like that, and so when I published in Arcadia with Vincent Valdez and other San Antonio writers, and that issue of Arcadia was edited by Ito Romo, a fiction writer from San Antonio, and he highlighted some Chicano writers from San Antonio. So I don't think about that that hybrid aspect of that journal. I think it just goes way back even more, you know.
We're going to have some questions from the audience. I wanted to, in continuing to place a context around this, mention Jean-Michel Basquiat, whose work always included words,
right,
and whose work sometimes appeared across words that were already there on the street. And someone like Ed Ruscha and top painters who used the words of advertising and the words of that we live in a very visual culture.
Right.
And that doesn't, and I think sometimes people think that that doesn't mean words, which is silly because you have Josephine Street right behind you on Jacinto's painting.
Right. Yeah.
We have a question, and I think it's good because it brings up some of your self-portrait as who are some of your influences among writers, poets, musicians. Who inspires you? And we could probably go to the self-portraits as a way of discussing this, I would think.
Well, I think a lot of my my inspiration comes from the writers I read, and as you will see in the self-portraits, I grew up being inspired by writers such as Kafka, John Steinbeck, Octavio Paz, Wordsworth, and now, I mean, I read a lot of contemporary poetry, and I read a lot of work from San Antonio writers. And one of my favorite artists is Cy Twombly. That I love his work. And so, in terms of the visual work, I go back to Apollinaire. I go back to, writers that, some of the surrealists, Baudelaire, he has a book called, what's it called? The Throw of the Dice or something like that. And it's one of those books that, that as a young man influenced me on how to move around the page,
Let's put up some of the self-portraits as various writers. There we are.
So there's one of my favorite writers, even now, and most of the writers I'm painting right now are writers that influenced me in my formative years, 19, 20. That's when I really started reading, I guess, books that I would discover. I would go to the library and I would find an interesting title, and I would pick it up and I would read it, and it turned out that it was stuff like Kafka and Ionesco and
So this is self-portrait as Kafka. And I said of this process of yours of these self-portrait as that you were channeling Cindy Sherman, except, and that was kind of a snotty comment, but it because in fact you really are capturing both the writer and your interest in them. Let's continue with these because they're quite.
There's Clarice Lispector.
Aha.
Yeah, Brazilian writer that I read a long time ago, and after during COVID, I've been rereading some of my old books. So right now, I'm working on a portrait of Virginia Woolf and Rodolfo Anaya, and the possibilities are endless. Maybe I'll make one of Jim LaVilla-Havelin, portrait as Jim LaVilla-Havelin.
We'll have chops, but Clarice Lispector, whose complete short stories were just published in a large volume by New Directions, a beautiful volume. And this is Octavio Paz.
No, this is Jean-Paul Sartre.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Even though he kind of looks like Octavio Paz, maybe. There's Octavio Paz.
Octavio Paz.
Yeah.
Who shares a name with you. So there's a
Berto Cayos.
So I look at this Octavio Paz, and I wonder about the public poet role, and if you've ever considered going more public with work in a mural form on a wall somewhere in San Antonio. We have a great mural tradition.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think um, I think that's going to happen eventually. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, Jim, but I started working on Canvas. I started doing Frontextos on Canvas. Again, I see them as containers, and I got to throw stuff in and make it work. But the canvases are pretty big. They're 36 by 48 overall, 36 by 36. So it's a different challenge than working in a 11 by 14 paper. And all the Frontextos from Los Días Oscuros are on 11 by 14, 11 inches by 14 paper.
We had an interesting process question come through. Some person asked, and I've asked you this before, do the images come first or the words? Or is there a rule of thumb?
Yeah, recently the pictures come first, simply because often, if I take a little break from work and I'm watching TV, I get a paper and I start scribbling, I start sketching, doodling. As you can see in the Octavio Paz on top, there's, I don't know if you can really tell, but there's a lot of layering. Mm-hmm. I often get a piece of paper and I just start moving my hand around just to get started. So I think recently the images, thinking without words comes first.
Or maybe thinking before words.
Thinking before words, I like that, yeah.
Because the words are, there's that old horrible for poets, great for visual artists phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I've never accepted that, but you have 1,030 pictures.
So how many words is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Do we have another self-portrait? I think we do. This is
that's Steinbeck. He was one of my favorite writers back in the day, reading The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men and Travels with Charlie and all those books.
Do you find you outgrow influences, inspirations, or lose interest, or find someone now that you couldn't read years back who you now read and care about?
Someone that I couldn't read years back, I don't know. That's a great question. As a student, I used to sell my books. After a professor told me, "Why don't you keep them? They're part of your education." So I started keeping on my books. So there's a bunch of books that I don't go back to, and I don't know. Let me think about that.
Okay. I always joke about the fact that until I was 50, I couldn't read Wallace Stevens. Yeah. And I hit 50 and suddenly Wallace Stevens was crystal clear to me.
Yeah.
Whereas Old Man Yeats was absolutely perfect for me as a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
I loved the voice and the song and the music of the words, but it took till 50 before the words of Wallace Stevens, the kind of structures of Wallace Stevens made sense to me. Right. Do we have one more self-portrait here, or are we at the end?
That's the end.
Okay. Huh. And then there are these, which we call Apollinaire and the concrete poets, who used words. Apollinaire has a famous concrete poet of a swan that's in the shape of a swan. And the British concrete poet Ian Hamilton Finlay worked this way as well.
A lot of the Brazilian poets too,
Right.
Concretismo and De Campos. And
Here's a great question on the Cuervo piece. Why not continue till just O? That's an interesting. That was number.
Okay, yeah. I think I screwed up. I should go back and revise it. And yeah, I mean, that's awesome because as you can see, the Frontexto doesn't end with me.
Right, right. And I think I'd have a dodge for you if you want to answer that question and not have it be, oh, I didn't think of that. And that is that the O is Octavio and it's implied.
Yeah.
But somehow that doesn't cut it.
Right. It's like, I don't know, it's like that Werewolf piece, it's like it's more than one poem at once, you know?
Right, right.
And I think that's one of the challenges. Where do you start? You know, how do you start piecing all those, how do you start putting together all those pieces, you know, to make meaning?
And if you were willing to let the line of Cuervo, Uro, move off a touch, the eye of the crow could have been the final O.
Yeah, well, maybe that's what it is.
Maybe
Let's make it that way, yeah.
It is. I love the string of birds, kind of as those hanging paper strings of birds. So this is a taste. You are available to the world through your Frontextos on your Facebook page.
And Instagram too. I started posting them on Instagram.
And I can't recommend enough If I Go Missing as an introduction to the concerns, the thoughts, the writing. In If I Go Missing, Octavio Quintanilla writes, all of us have a story we want to tell, a story that loses all courage once it reaches the tip of our senses. And I think the wonderful thing about the Frontextos is you reached the tip of your senses and you went beyond. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all for watching, and thank you, Luminaria, and thank you, the San Antonio Public Library.